Hello students, good afternoon. So in the last class we have discussed about fundamental rights. In that lecture I've told you about the meaning of the term right. Then I've discussed about fundamental rights, its constitutional provisions, and then we have also discussed about classification of fundamental rights. Right? For the sake of simplicity, we can classify fundamental rights on the basis of content, and on the basis of content there are 6 fundamental rights. Right? That is right to equality from Articles 14 to 18, right to freedom from Articles 19 to 22, right against exploitation from Articles 23 to 24, cultural and educational rights, Articles 29 and 30, and right to constitutional remedies under Article 32. Right? So on the basis of content or subject matter, fundamental rights can be classified into 6 categories. But under original constitution, under original Indian constitution, there were 7 fundamental rights. And the 7th fundamental right was right to property under Article 31 and 19, Clause 1, Subclause F. But 44th Constitutional Amendment Act 1978, it removed right to property as a fundamental right and included it as a constitutional right under Article 300A in Part 12. Right? This we have seen. Then the second type of classification was on the basis of availability of fundamental rights. So there are certain fundamental rights which are available exclusively only to the citizens of India, and there are certain fundamental rights which are available to both citizens and non-citizens, that is foreigners. So which are the fundamental rights which are exclusively available to the citizens of India? They are fundamental rights under Article 15, 16, 19, 29 and 30. These are the 5 fundamental rights which are available exclusively only to citizens. And other fundamental rights are available to both citizens and non-citizens, that is foreigners. This was the second classification we have already seen. The third type of classification is self-executory fundamental rights and non-self-executory fundamental rights. And self-executory fundamental rights, what are they? Yes, tell me. क्या है? आप बताइए. Okay, so self-executory fundamental rights are those fundamental rights which are capable of enforcement or execution on itself. Meaning those fundamental rights which are capable of self-enforcement. Self-enforcement. Meaning they are not dependent on subsequent legislation to be passed for their enforcement. There are certain fundamental rights which are capable of self-enforcement or self-execution. They do not require any law to be passed by the legislature for their enforcement. For example, Article 14 is an example of self-executory fundamental rights. What is Article 14? Right to equality before law and equal protection of law. Now this right is example of self-executory fundamental right. Why? Because it is capable of self-enforcement. Has Parliament passed any law to implement fundamental right under Article 14? No, there is no requirement. It is capable of self-enforcement. कोई law pass करना नहीं पड़ेगा इसको implement करने के लिए. Article 14. Right? Now, non-self-executory fundamental rights are those fundamental rights which are not capable of self-enforcement, which are not capable of enforcement or execution upon themselves. Right? Right? They require subsequent legislation to be passed by the Parliament in case of India for its enforcement. For example, I gave you, what are the examples of non-self-executory fundamental rights? Fundamental rights under Article 17, then Article 21A, Article 21A, then Article 23 and Article 24. Now these are the examples of non-self-executory fundamental rights. क्यों? मैंने आपको बताया था एग्जाम्पल आर्टिकल 17 का. आर्टिकल 17 abolishes untouchability and forbids its practice in any form. And it further states that enforcement of any disability arising out of the practice of untouchability shall be an offense punishable in accordance with the law. Now, Article 17 cannot be enforced unless and until Parliament passes law subsequently. And that law was passed by the Parliament in 1955, known as Untouchability Offences Act, which was later on renamed in 1976 as Protection of Civil Rights Act. So from 1950 till 1955, this fundamental right under Article 17 was not enforceable. क्योंकि पार्लियामेंट ने लॉ पास करना चाहिए था. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्या कहता है? पार्लियामेंट ने लॉ पास करना है और उस लॉ में बताएंगे आप कि अनटचेबिलिटी क्या है, डिफाइन करोगे अनटचेबिलिटी को, और पनिशमेंट क्या होगा. अगर किसी ने अनटचेबिलिटी प्रैक्टिस करेगी तो पनिशमेंट क्या होगी? 2 साल, 2 years of imprisonment, whether it is fine. Parliament has to incorporate all these provisions in the law. The law was not passed until 1955. Right? So fundamental right was there in the constitution, but it was not capable of enforcement. तो इसका मतलब ये है, अगर 1950 और 1955 के बीच में अगर किसी ने अनटचेबिलिटी प्रैक्टिस की होगी और जिसके अगेंस्ट अनटचेबिलिटी प्रैक्टिस हुई वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट के पास गया होगा कि देखो ये मेरा फंडामेंटल राइट है आर्टिकल 17, सुप्रीम कोर्ट के पास कोई भी रेमेडी नहीं थी. सुप्रीम कोर्ट कोई उसको हेल्प नहीं कर सकता था. क्यों? सुप्रीम कोर्ट कैन पनिश द पर्सन ओनली ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ लॉ. सुप्रीम कोर्ट अपने हिसाब से कोई पनिशमेंट नहीं देते हैं. एक लॉज है, सीआरपीसी है, आईपीसी है. IPC talks about the definition of offenses and the punishment for that offenses. तो IPC में जो IPC की धाराओं में जो पनिशमेंट लिखी है उसके हिसाब से जुडिशरी जजमेंट देता है, या फिर पर्टिकुलर लॉ पास किया है उसके हिसाब से, अपने हिसाब से नहीं वो. सो जुडिशरी ऑलवेज इंटरप्रेट्स द लॉ and then on the basis of that law judiciary decides what can be the quantum of punishment or a degree of punishment. लेकिन 1950 से 1955 तक कोई लॉ ही नहीं था जिसमें ये लिखा गया हो, जिसमें वो ये लिखा हो कि those who practice untouchability will get a maximum punishment of say imprisonment of 2 years and a fine of say 5,000 rupees. ऐसा कहीं लॉ था नहीं. तो जब तक वो लॉ बना तब तक ये आर्टिकल 17 was not capable of enforcement. अब आया समझ में? That is why Article 17, fundamental rights under Article 17 is an example of non-self-executory fundamental right. Similarly, Article 21A, when was Article 21A was incorporated? It was incorporated through 86th Constitutional Amendment Act 2002, right? What is Article 21A? Article 21 guarantees fundamental right to free and compulsory education, right, till elementary level. अब ये कब incorporate किया गया as a fundamental right to free and compulsory education to all the children till they complete the age of 14. ये कब incorporate किया constitution में? 2002 में. But Article 21A itself says that what can be the nature of this right to education? It will be decided by the Parliament by law. So Parliament was supposed to pass the law to implement Article 21A. Without that law, Article 21A was not capable of enforcement. And Parliament passed such law only in 2009. Right to free and compulsory education Act 2009. And this 2009 Act came into effect from 1st April. From April 1, right? April 1, 2010. So it means that from 2002 till April 1st, 2010, there was fundamental right to education under Article 21A, but it was not capable of enforcement. मतलब ऐसे चिल्ड्रन कोर्ट में नहीं जा सकते थे कि भाई हमको फंडामेंटल राइट हमारा इंप्लीमेंट नहीं हो रहा है. कोर्ट बोलेगा भाई लॉ पास करना है पार्लियामेंट ने. देयर इज नो लॉ. ये लॉ तो पास किया 2009 में, वो इंप्लीमेंट होना शुरू हो गया April 1, 2010 से. इट मीन्स दैट फंडामेंटल राइट टू एजुकेशन अंडर आर्टिकल 21, it came into force in real sense of the term, or it became effective in real sense of the term from April 1, 2010 only. Before that, it was only on it was only on paper under Article 21A. It was not capable of enforcement. Why? Because it is an example of non-self-executory fundamental right. Same is the case with Article 23, Article 23 and Article 24. Article 23, what is Article 23? It is Article 23 and 24 are part of right against exploitation. So Article 23 prohibits forced labor, right? It prohibits trafficking in human beings, forced labor, begar, and any other forms of forced labor. That is what Article 23 is all about. I am going to discuss Article 23 in detail. But as of now, just remember this. That is what Article 23 is. What is Article 24? Article 24 is about prohibition of employment of children in factories, mines, and any other hazardous industries. Now, both the Article 23 and 24 state that Parliament has to pass law to implement fundamental right under Article 23 and 24. बिना लॉ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में लिखा हुआ है, ओके फाइन, चिल्ड्रन शुड नॉट बी एम्प्लॉयड इन हैजार्डस माइंस एंड फैक्ट्रीज. लेकिन सपोज किसी व्यक्ति ने चिल्ड्रंस को माइंस में एम्प्लॉय किया, तो इट इज अ वायलेशन ऑफ आर्टिकल 24. तो वो पर्सन जाएगा कोर्ट में. अब कोर्ट ने उस पर्सन को पनिशमेंट करना चाहिए. अब पनिशमेंट कब करेगा कोर्ट? अगर कोई पार्लियामेंट ने लॉ पास किया है जिसमें पनिशमेंट लिखा हुआ, तभी तो पनिश करेगा. पार्लियामेंट में लॉ पास किए बिना ये आर्टिकल 24 इज नॉट इन्फोर्सिबल, वॉज नॉट इन्फोर्सिबल. समझ में आया? राइट. सो फंडामेंटल राइट्स, so self-executory fundamental rights are those fundamental rights which are capable of self-enforcement or self-execution without depending on any subsequent legislation to be passed for their enforcement. That is why I told you self-executory fundamental rights are complete fundamental rights. Article 15 is an example of self-executory fundamental right. Article 14 is an example of self-executory fundamental right. Article 21, right to personal liberty, right to life and personal liberty under Article 21. क्या कोई लॉ पास करना है पार्लियामेंट ने इसको राइट टू लाइफ ये करने के लिए? नहीं. इट इज सेल्फ इन्फोर्समेंट, इट इज कंप्लीट फंडामेंटल राइट. समझ में आया? बट नॉन सेल्फ एग्जीक्यूटरी फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर दोज फंडामेंटल राइट्स विच आर नॉट कैपेबल ऑफ सेल्फ इन्फोर्समेंट. They cannot become enforceable unless and until legislature passes the law. So non-self-executory fundamental rights, they become capable of enforcement only after subsequent legislation is passed to that effect by the legislature. In case of India, that is Parliament. Got it? अभी आया समझ में? आपको कोई डाउट है? नहीं है? So this Article 17, fundamental rights under Article 17, Article 21A, Article 23 and Article 24, they are examples of non-self-executory fundamental rights, and other fundamental rights are examples of self-executory fundamental rights. Right? Okay. So that is what is the three type of classification of fundamental rights. We have seen that in the last lecture. Those who are watching online, you can go and watch that video. Okay. Then we have also discussed about what are legal rights, what is the difference between legal right and constitutional right, fundamental rights and non-fundamental rights. All these things we have discussed. Okay. Now today, primarily I am going to discuss the salient features of fundamental rights, the characteristics of fundamental rights. Now, before I come to the topic, today's topic of salient features of fundamental rights, I would like to discuss some important concepts. Because I always say UPSC is asking questions on concepts. UPSC always wants to test your conceptual clarity. So in that context, I am going to discuss some important concepts like state, then government, then we are going to compare state, the concept of state with concept of government. Then I am also going to discuss the concept of nation. Sorry, not national. है ना? So we are going to discuss what is the difference between state and nation. Can we use the terms state and nation interchangeably or not? That we are going to discuss. Okay? We are going to discuss these three concepts: concept of state, concept of government, and concept of nation and nationalism as well, right? And then I am going to discuss salient features of fundamental rights. Now, what is state? What is state? Okay? Concept of state. Capital S, concept of state or small state, whatever small s, that will be too far. Just understand state is a physical entity. Physical entity. State is a physical entity. A physical entity, it means that it actually exists. You can see the state. It is a physical entity as in it has fixed geographic boundary. So in that state, that says state is a physical or political entity. State is a physical and political entity. State is a political concept, right? Now, there are four important elements of state. Four important elements of state. Elements of state. These four elements should coexist simultaneously. Then only we can call any institution as state. Right? So the first and one of the most important element or characteristic or requirement to call any particular institution as a state is that it should have fixed and definite territory. UPSC has asked this, the last prelims, it asked, what do you understand by state? What is the appropriate definition of state? So first element of state is territory. But that territory should be fixed and definite, defined. It should be limited, right? So state should have fixed and definite territory. State cannot have unlimited territory. Is there any state which has unlimited territory? No. The territory of Indian state, it is fixed. Article 1 of the Indian Constitution talks about territory of India. Right? Article 1, territory of India shall comprise of territory of union, territory of states, and territories that may be acquired by the state in future. Article 1, clause 3 talks about what should be the territory. So Constitution defines the territory of India. Yes, okay. And subsequent schedule is first schedule, right? So state must have fixed and definite territory. Without having fixed and definite territory, a particular political entity cannot be called as state. Clear? Second, now merely having fixed and definite territory is not enough. Antarctica also has fixed and definite territory. But can we call Antarctica as a state? No. You know why? Because it lacks sizable population. So along with fixed and definite territory, there should be sizable population who who should reside in that particular territory. Antarctica is a continent. It satisfies this first condition, fixed and definite territory, but it does not satisfy this second condition. It does not have sizable population. Right? It is extremely difficult to reside in Antarctica because of extreme weather conditions. Right? So can we call Antarctica as a state? According to our definition, cannot. It is a continent. This is the second important requirement. Okay? Third important requirement or third important element of the state is that now you have fixed and definite territory. You have people. Now you require some political institution to govern the people who reside within that territory and to protect that territory as well from external and internal attacks. Right? So it means that merely having fixed and definite territory and sizable population is not enough. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. So what should we have? So another important element of the concept of state is government. Duly established government, right? Who will govern the population, who will make laws to govern that population and to who lives in a particular territory, and to protect that territory and people from any kind of external and internal threats. So government is also an important element of state. Now, the fourth and the most important element of state is sovereignty. This is the most important element of any state. What is sovereignty? While discussing preamble, I told you about sovereignty. Yes, Shashank, Shekhar, namaste. So, while discussing preamble, I discussed each and every word mentioned in the preamble. So, preamble of India declares India as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. And I have explained the meaning of each and every term. At that time, I told you that sovereignty means supreme power. Supreme power and authority within a fixed territory. Right? And so sovereignty means supreme power, the ultimate power and authority within a definite territory. So within a territory, it is the state that is sovereign, that is supreme authority, supreme power to take decisions, both internally and externally. There is no institution, there is no authority whatsoever which is over and above the sovereign authority, that is state. Is there any other entity which can tell India, which is over and above the Indian state? No. So sovereignty means supreme authority of a state. There is no authority, there is no power, there is no institution whatsoever which is over and above the sovereign state. All the institutions, they are bound by the authority of sovereign state, and they cannot challenge the sovereignty of the state or a sovereign authority. Now sovereignty is of two types. One is internal sovereignty and another is external sovereignty. Internal sovereignty means supreme power and authority to regulate internal affairs. For example, how India should govern its people. What kind of decisions India should take internally. It is a sovereign power of Indian state. No other authority whatsoever, No external country whatsoever, no external institution, be it international organization, United Nations, anybody can tell us, India, about how we should govern our people. How should we handle, say, Kashmir problem? How should we handle the problem of nationalism? Why? Because we are internally sovereign. So that is why we always say, whenever any country makes comments on, say, Kashmir issue or, say, violation of human rights, then we always say that India is a sovereign country. And no other country has a right to interfere into the internal affairs of India. So internal sovereignty means supreme power to handle internal affairs of a country. है ना, हम बोलते हैं ना हमेशा कि don't preach us. We are a democratic country and we know how to deal with our population and the problems. That is called as internal sovereignty. What is external sovereignty? External sovereignty means supreme power and authority to determine countries' relationship with other states or international organizations or non-state actors which are outside the boundaries of India. That is called as external authority. What should be the India's relationship with Russia? No third party can tell us how we should deal with Russia. Whether we should go ahead with S-400 deal or not with Russia, it is to be decided by India only. USA cannot tell us, oh, you cancel the deal. No. समझ में आया? Because we are sovereign externally as well as internally. Now, understand what is the difference between sovereignty and independence. See, independence is a political concept. Independence is a political concept. Sorry, I'm writing here. Independence is a political concept, whereas sovereignty is a legal concept. Now again, I am discussing the difference between sovereignty and independence. Right? Independence is a political concept. So, for example, India became politically independent on 15th of August 1947. But India became sovereign in legal sense of the term on 26th January 1950. Because on 26th of January 1950, Constitution of India came into effect. And preamble of the Indian Constitution declares India as sovereign. So independence is a political concept, whereas sovereignty is a legal concept. India was independent from 1947, 14th August 1947 till 26 January 1915. India was not sovereign in real sense of the term. India was what is called as dominion. India was dominion of British Empire. Because in between 1947 to 1950, the British Crown was sovereign legally. So India became sovereign in real sense of the term on 26th January 1950. Understood the difference between sovereignty and independence? Sovereignty is always a legal concept. Okay? So now, what are the important elements of the state? See, these are the four important elements of the state. Fixed and definite territory, sizable population, government, sovereignty. These are the four essential elements of state. Absence of any one element is not, even if any one of the elements is absent, then also that particular political entity will not be called as state. All these four elements should coexist simultaneously. So can you call India as a state? Can you call India as a state? Now let us look at this. Does India have fixed and definite territory? Yes. Article 1. Does India have sizable population? Yes. In fact, we have more than what is required. Our population is second, India is the second most populous country in the world. So we have more than sizable population. है ना? We have government of India is duly constituted through elections, free and fair elections, so on and so forth, right? Then we also have, is Indian state sovereign? Yes, it became sovereign on 26 January 1950. So these are the four important elements of the state. Now tell me, on the basis of this definition, can you call Palestine as a state? Is Palestine a state? No. Why? Why Palestine is not a state? Tell me. Lack of sovereignty. Yes. What else? Now, see, there is one organization called as Palestine Liberation Organization. Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. Now, PLO is recognized as sole and legitimate representative of Palestinian people. Right? Now, this PLO has declared that its territory, the territory would be Gaza and West Bank. Gaza Strip and West Bank. So they said that the state of Palestine includes this territory of Gaza Strip and West Bank. But Palestine is not a state according to the definition I gave you. You know why? Number one, Palestine is not a sovereign entity. It is not a sovereign country. The sovereignty of the Palestine, the sovereignty of the territory of Palestine belongs to another state, that is Israel. And I told you sovereignty is inalienable, inseparable characteristic or element of the state. So Palestine is not a sovereign entity, and that is why it cannot be called as state. Okay? Second, who rules Gaza and West Bank in real sense of the term? It is Israel. So it is not independent as well. The jurisdiction over Gaza and West Bank lies with another state, that is Israel. So that is why Palestine is not a state. Because to call any particular institution as a state, it should satisfy four conditions. It should have sizable, fixed and definite territory. It should have sizable population. It should have government of its own, and it should be a sovereign. It should have sovereignty. So we cannot call Palestine as a state according to our definition. Can you call Pakistan a state? Absolutely. It is a state. Right? Okay? So all other entities. So अगर आपको पूछा जाए कि what is the state, what is the appropriate definition of the state, then you should talk about these four elements and understand all these four elements of the state are complementary and supplementary to each other. They cannot be separated from each other. Even absence of any one of these elements will not satisfy the condition of calling a particular entity as a state. Got it clear? Now, what is government? Or what is the difference between state and government, right? State and government. Now understand that more often than not we use the terms state and government interchangeably, but it is a mistake. Conceptually speaking, the terms state and government cannot be used interchangeably. There is a difference between India as a state and government of India. Right? Now let us compare state with government. Number one, I told you the important elements of the state, and one of the elements of the state was government. So which is more extensive? Is it government or state? Which includes what? State includes government or government includes the state? State includes the government. Government is a part of state. So the first important difference is that state is, write down, state is more extensive. State is more extensive than government. State is more broader than government. Right? State includes all the public institutions and members of society as citizens. All the public institutions are part of state, but all the public institutions are not part of government. Got it? So state is more extensive than government. State consists of all the public institutions as well as members of society as a citizens. है ना? Right? Whereas government is a part of state. Is a part of state. State is more extensive than government. State is broader entity. If you call this as state, then one of the circle would be government. And what are the other three circles? What are the other three circles? Yes, the three other elements: population, territory, sovereignty. So state is more extensive than government, whereas government is a part of state. So can you use the term state and government extensively? No. Not all the citizens are part of government, but all the citizens are part of state. Only those who rule, or only those who are part of legislature, executive and judiciary, they are members of government. All of us are not part of government. Can you say that you are a part of government of India? No. Only the ministers, only the executives, both permanent executives, bureaucrats, and political executives, ministers, they are part of government. Then legislature, member of parliament, member of state legislatures, they are part of government. One of the branches of government, judiciary. Government has three branches: legislature, executive and judiciary. So only those people who are part of these three branches, they are part of government. Got it? Huh? But all the people, irrespective of whether you are a part of government or not, all are part of state. So which is broader? Which is comprehensive? It is the state. Got it? This is the first difference. Okay? Now let us consider the second difference between state and government. Okay? I am just taking it upwards. Okay? Second. Now, state is an abstract concept. Whereas government is concrete reality. State is an abstract concept. It is general it's a generic concept. Whereas government is concrete reality. We can see that, how government is functioning. Right? So this is the important difference. State is an abstract concept, or state is an abstract entity. Whereas government is concrete reality. Yes, it is a reality. Okay? Concrete reality. Third. Now again, state is permanent. State is permanent in nature, or state is permanent entity. Whereas government exists for a fixed period of time. Yes? Government exists for a fixed period of time. State is a permanent entity, whereas government come and go. After every 5 years, government may be replaced. Right? From 2004 till 2014, the government of India was ruled by UPA, led by Congress. But it was replaced in 2014 by another coalition, NDA, led by BJP. So government come and go. Government exists for a fixed period of time. In India, it is at max, it can, government, if it comes to power, it at max, it can remain in power for 5 years. Maximum. Then there will be elections and it might be, the government might be replaced. But can you say that the government, the NDA government led by BJP is going to remain in power remain in power permanently for an indefinite period of time? No. But state is permanent. State exists irrespective of whether which government is in power or not. State always exists. So state is a permanent entity, whereas government exists for a fixed period of time. Government come and go, but state remains intact. State remains intact. Got it? Yes? Now, next difference. Okay? See, state is politically neutral. State is politically neutral, but government has ideological agenda. State is politically neutral. Can you say, can you associate any particular ideology with Indian state? No. State is politically neutral concept, whereas government has ideological agenda. And those who run government, they frame laws, policies and programs to achieve that ideological agenda, to realize that ideological agenda. So ideology is a part of government. Government has ideology. Like government of India, ruled by NDA coalition led by BJP, it has its own ideological agenda. And it is framing laws, policies and programs to realize that ideological agenda. But state, Indian state as such, it is politically neutral. Got it? Now the most important difference. Yes. What is the most important and essential element of the state I told you? Yes, sovereignty. So state is a sovereign entity. State is a sovereign entity. Which is sovereign in India? Government of India or state of India? State. So state is a sovereign entity. Sovereignty is an essential characteristic of state, not government. Now, then, how can we write? What will we write here? We can say that government derives its power and authority from the state. The source of authority of the government is state. Government is an agent of state. Government is agent of state. Government is agent of state. So who is master and who is servant? State is master and government is a servant of state. Government of India is serving the interest of the state. Okay? So government is means through which governments is means or agency through which the sovereignty or authority of state is what? Is exercised. Sovereignty is an element of state, but state does not exercise its own sovereignty. The sovereignty of the state is exercised through the agency of government. So government is an agency or means through which the sovereignty or authority of the state is exercised. State is a sovereign entity, government is not sovereign. Government merely exercises the sovereignty on behalf of the state. ठीक है? Right? समझ में आया? ठीक है? So what is the source of Government of India? Government of India derives its power and authority from the state. So state is a sovereign entity, whereas government is an agent of state. Government is a servant of the state. Government is expected to serve the state. Got it? The difference between state and government? Yes? These are the differences. Okay? These are the 4 differences. Did you write this? Okay? Clear hai differences? So if UPSC asks you, consider the following statements in case about state and government, and if UPSC gives any of these statements, now you are in a condition, you are in a position to answer the question. ठीक है? Difference between, so can you from today onwards, will you from today onwards use the concept of state and government interchangeably? No, because there are 5 points of differences. There are 5 key differences I've told you. There are other differences as well, but these are the 5 most important differences between state and government. Got it clear? Very good. Now let us discuss state and nation. Again, another important comparison. Thank you, Sadhu Yadav. अब देखो, the way you use the terms state and government interchangeably, many of you use the terms state and nation interchangeably. But state और nation, राज्य और राष्ट्र एक नहीं है, conceptually speaking. Did I tell you what is state? 4 essential elements of the state, right? Those 4 essential elements are elements of state, not of a nation. So I told you in the beginning, state is a political, state is a physical and what? Political concept. State is a physical and political concept. State is a physical and political concept. Whereas nation is a psychological, emotional and cultural concept or entity. What is nation? Nation basically is a psychological, emotional and cultural concept. Now what do we mean by that? Okay? So those people who consider themselves as a part of nation, they have what is called as sense of belongingness. Sense of belongingness, or there is a feeling of, there is a sense of we feeling, sense of we feeling amongst those who consider themselves as a part of nation. So nation is an emotional concept. It is a psychological concept. Right? It is a cultural concept. So those who consider themselves as a part of particular nation, they will have a sense of belongingness. They will have a strong sense of attachment with the nation. Yes, that is what. Okay? Then, nation consists of people. Nation consists of people. Nation consists of people having shared. So those who are part of a particular nation, they have some shared characteristics. So they share something. What? So nation consists of people, they have shared language, religion, ethnicity, culture, history, etc. Yes? Those people who consider themselves as a part of particular nation, they have shared language, shared religion, shared ethnicity, shared culture. All the people who are part of Indian nation, all of us, we have shared culture. Yes? All of us, we have shared history. Do all of us have a shared history? Yes. Because we are a part of Indian nation. Do all of us have sense of belongingness as an Indian? Yes. Do we have emotional attachment with each other? Yes, but in theory. Because India में communalism है, casteism है, regionalism है, separatism है. But ठीक है, just ignore that. Let's ignore that. ठीक है? So, nation is a cultural, psychological and emotional concept. State is a physical and political concept. Got it? Now tell me, can we call Palestine as a state? No. We have discussed that because it lacks sovereignty. It is not independent. Palestine is not independent. The jurisdiction of Palestinian territories is under the hands of Israel. So Palestine is not a state. Okay? Palestine is not a state, but it is a nation. Yes, Palestine is not a state, but it is. Yes, is it a nation? Can we call Palestine as a nation? Yes. Why? Because all the Palestinians, they have sense of we feeling. They have sense of belongingness with each other. They have shared language, religion, ethnicity, culture, history. Right? So that is why Palestine is not a state, but it is a nation. State has a fixed and definite territory. Another difference between state and nation. Okay? State has a fixed and definite territory. Okay? State, nation. First difference I told you. Okay? State is a political and physical concept. Nation is a psychological, cultural, emotional concept. Okay? That there is a sense of belongingness. Now, state. No, I forgot completely what I was saying. I got blank. What I was saying?
State has a fixed and definite territory.
Yes, very good. Now, state has fixed and definite territory. Yes? Thank you for helping me out. Because it's really hot. And you guys are not allowing me to turn on the AC. Why? हाँ क्यों बंद कर दिया AC? हवा तो हम I am speaking continuously. Let us open it. Let us turn on for 15-20 minutes. Let the atmosphere get cold, and then let the environment come in. There's a funny English, no? Okay, so state has a fixed and definite territory. Indian state has a fixed and definite territory. Article 1 of Indian Constitution. Nation may exist over a fixed territory or it may spread over different territories. Yes? State has to have a fixed and definite territory, but nation may exist over a fixed territory, or nation may go beyond. It may spread across territories, different territories. For example, Palestine is a nation, right? Now, Palestinian people, they are not limited. They do not live in a particular territory. The Palestinian people, they are spread across European countries. But still they consider themselves as a part of nation. So nation may exist over a particular territory, or it may exist across different territories. Let me give you an example. Indian citizen who is an NRI, non-resident Indian. Now NRI, he does not live over a fixed and definite territory of India. He lives in, say, USA. He has migrated for the purpose of job, education, business to another country, say USA. So he is not a part of state. He does not live in a fixed and definite territory of India, but he is still a part of nation. Because he has that sense of attachment, emotional feeling, sense of belongingness with India as a nation. In fact, NRI is a part of state as well, because he is a citizen of India. But he is a part of Indian nation as well, even though he does not reside within Indian territory. So nation may exist over a fixed territory, or it may cut across different territories. Palestinians, it is not as if only those Palestinian people who reside in Gaza and West Bengal, only they are part of Palestinian nation. Is it that? No. The Palestinian people, they are spread across various European countries. They are called as Palestinian refugees. But they also consider themselves as a part of future Palestine nation. Got it? Okay? Now, from this, let us understand that state can consist of multiple nations. One state can consist of multiple nations. Let me give you an example of Soviet Union. Now, Soviet Union, or Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, which was a state, right? It was a state because it had all the 4 elements, okay? Population, territory, government, and sovereignty. Now, Soviet Union or USSR, which existed till 1991, it was a state, but it consisted of people belonging to multiple nationalities or multiple, the state of Soviet Union consisted of multiple nations. It consisted of people who were Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Ukrainians. So one state may consist of multiple nations within itself. You can take example of India as well. Right? There are multiple nations within the state of India. There are different India is an extremely diverse country. India is diverse in terms of religion, language, culture, ethnicity, so on and so forth. So one state might consist of multiple nations. Got it? The difference between nation and state. So you should not use the terms interchangeably. Got it? Okay, fine. Now, what is nationalism? It's very simple. Now, nationalism basically is a force. नौकरी बाबू, क्या बात है, नाम ही नौकरी बाबू है इनका. हेलो नौकरी बाबू, बहुत अच्छा नाम है आपका. यू आर ए हिलेरियस पर्सन. ठीक है. Now, nationalism in simple words means love for a nation or a country. Nationalism in simple words means love for a nation. Nationalism gives us what is called as political identity. And like nation, nationalism also involves sense of attachment or sense of belongingness. है ना? अगर आप nationalist हो, इसका मतलब आप में एक वो sense of belongingness है. You have particular political identity. And nationalism, the feeling of nationalism gives us our identity, and it gives us self-esteem. Self-esteem as well, right? है कि नहीं? Self-esteem. See, Britishers were ruling us. All the people of India came together under the leadership of Indian National Congress, and they launched freedom struggle, the freedom movement, to force Britishers to go back. Why? Because we wanted to restore our self-esteem and self-respect, which were lost due to almost 200 years of colonial rule by Britishers. So we wanted to exercise our right to self-determination. Right? Okay? So that is what nationalism is all about. Nationalism is a force which binds people together. Now, supporting Indian cricket team during a World Cup match with Pakistan is an expression of nationalism. And breaking TVs after India loses match is also an expression of nationalism. Support for Indian armed forces during war or during incursions, say with China, is also an expression of nationalism. Standing for national anthem is also an expression of nationalism. Now you understand what is nationalism is all about. Love for a nation, love for our country. And nationalism gives us political and cultural identity. It restores our self-esteem and self-respect. So nationalism involves a right to self-determination. Now I told you that nationalism is a force that binds people together. So nationalism is a progressive force in that sense, but nationalism is a force that destroys as well. Nationalism which binds people together is called as progressive nationalism. And nationalism that destroys peace and harmony is called as aggressive nationalism. So nationalism can be a binding force, right? But at the same time, it can be destroyer as well. Have you ever कभी आप लोगों ने रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर के बारे में पढ़ा है क्या? उन्होंने एक पोएम लिखी है, Where mind is without fear and head is held high, where the states are not divided through narrow domestic walls. Through that poem, he was criticizing the concept of nationalism. Rabindranath Tagore was one of the most important critics of the concept of nationalism. You know why? Because he saw World War first, as well as So World War I and World War II, they were results due to aggressive and excessive assertive nationalism, because the countries of Europe, they wanted to spread their own territories. Aggressive nationalism, attack the other countries and annex them. That is what Hitler tried to do. The nationalism in Germany during the times of Hitler was aggressive nationalism. It was a destroyer. It was a force that destroyed, and that led to World War I and World War II. Not only Hitler. You cannot hold only Hitler responsible for World War I and World War II. So Tagore criticized the feeling of nationalism. He was in favor of internationalism. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. One of the important elements of India's foreign policy is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is our family. Right? Okay? So Tagore was in favor of internationalism. He was critic of nationalism. Why should we have love only for our own country? Why can't we have love for entire humanity as a whole? Okay, right? So nationalism can be progressive. It can be a binding force, a force that binds people together, but at the same time, it can be destroyer as well. So narrow nationalism, extreme nationalism in India leads to communal riots between Hindu and Muslim. Hindus and Christians, Christians and Muslim. Why it happens? Because of wrong sense of nationalism. So now it's up to you कि आपको कौन से nationalism में believe करना है. Progressive nationalism में believe करना है या aggressive nationalism में? अगर कोई national anthem में नहीं खड़ा हुआ, उसको पीट के मारने लगे, उठ के मारने लगे उसको, हाँ, छड़ी से. That is aggressive nationalism. कोई 14 फरवरी आ रहा है अभी, हाँ, गार्डन में दो कपल एंजॉय कर रहे हैं, उनको पकड़ के मार रहे हो. Okay? This is against our culture and tradition and what is. That is an example of aggressive nationalism. So now I leave it up to you whether to believe in aggressive nationalism or progressive nationalism. Okay? Right? Fine. Now this is what I wanted to discuss. Okay? Difference between state and government, difference between state and nation. Okay? Fine. So now let us discuss about features of fundamental rights. I thought I should discuss that before. Features of fundamental rights. Key features of fundamental rights. ठीक है? One by one, features of fundamental rights discuss करेंगे हम. There are certain features which we can understand it from the classification of fundamental rights as well. For example, one of the important features of fundamental rights is that some fundamental rights are available to the citizens only, some fundamental rights are available to both citizens and non-citizens. This can also be one of the features. I am not discussing that here because I have already discussed that. Then second feature can be some of the fundamental rights are self-enforceable fundamental rights, and fundamental rights some fundamental rights are non-self-enforceable fundamental rights. Second characteristic, and this I have already discussed. Now let us discuss one by one other. Fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. Yes, I want you to write down in short. Fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. Yes, Shishti Singh, hello. Fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. What do we mean by justiciable? Fundamental rights are justiciable, meaning they are legally enforceable in a court of law. In the last class, I gave you the definition of rights. Rights are social claims of an individual which are recognized by the society and enforced by the state. And those rights which are legally enforced by the state, they are called as legal rights. See, rights are of different types. Human rights, natural rights, legal rights, okay? Ethical and moral rights. There are different types of rights. We are discussing about legal. Fundamental rights are legal rights because they are guaranteed by the Constitution itself, which is the supreme law of the land. So fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. It means that they are legally enforceable in a court of law. It means that if fundamental rights are violated, then individuals can approach the courts for their enforcement. If fundamental rights are not made justiciable, then what will happen? They will remain only on paper, right? But now fundamental rights are justiciable. So fundamental rights have backing of the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. So fundamental rights are justiciable, meaning they are legally enforceable in a court of law. If fundamental rights are violated, you can directly approach, you can approach the courts for their enforcement. अगर आपका fundamental right violate किया तो आप कोर्ट में जा सकते हो और उनसे रेमेडी मांग सकते हो. और अगर ये जस्टिसेबल नहीं होता तो क्या आप कोर्ट में जा सकते? नहीं. So fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. Now in the coming lectures, I'm also going to discuss directive principles of state policy. Now directive principles of state policy, they are not justiciable in nature under Article 17. Under Article 37. Directive principles of state policy, they are not justiciable in nature, meaning they are not legally enforceable in a court of law. You cannot go to the court and ask the court to tell the state to enforce directive principles of state policy or to implement directive principles of state policy. No, why? Because Article 37 of the Indian Constitution states that directive principles of state policy, they are non-justiciable in nature. Difference समझ में आया? Fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. If your fundamental rights are violated, you can approach the court, and you can directly approach the Supreme Court as well, if and when your fundamental rights are violated. समझ में आया? This one of the important features first. Now another important feature is who is the defender and protector and guarantor of your fundamental rights? Tell me. Who interprets the Constitution? Supreme Parliament कैसे Constitution को interpret करेगा? Yes, Supreme Court. Who interprets the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but who interprets the Constitution? Yes. So fundamental rights, another feature of fundamental rights is that fundamental rights are defended defended and guaranteed by whom? Guaranteed by, not guaranteed. See, fundamental rights are guaranteed by the constitution, but they are defended and protected by the Supreme Court. Who guarantees you certain sets of fundamental rights? Part 3 of the Constitution of India. But who protects and defend and protect your fundamental rights? Supreme Court. So another feature of fundamental rights is that they are defended and protected by the Supreme Court of India, which is the apex court, which is the highest court in India. Right? So if your fundamental rights are violated, then you can directly approach the Supreme Court of India, not necessarily by way of appeal from the judgments of High Court. You can directly approach the Supreme Court if your fundamental rights are violated. This is called as right to constitutional remedies. Under Article 32, this is the most important article. The most important article. Okay, Shrishti Singh, thank you for your क्या बोलते हैं उसको? Your comment. She's saying very poor content compared to other free YouTube content. Thank you, Shrishti. Thank you for your comment. देखो, हर चीज को पढ़ना है. अगर अच्छी कमेंट है तो भी पढ़ना है, और बुरी कमेंट है तो भी पढ़ना है, ठीक है? But I don't think by any way the content is poor. Maybe the understanding of Shrishti is poor. ठीक है? So please improve your understanding, Shrishti. I'll help you with that if you want. ठीक है? चलो. So चलो. So fundamental rights are defended and guaranteed by the Supreme Court. ठीक है? It means that you can directly approach the Supreme Court if your fundamental rights are violated, not necessarily by way of appeal from the judgments of High Court. Normally क्या होता है? देखो, that is what is the difference between, I told you in the difference between fundamental rights and constitutional rights, other constitutional rights. If your fundamental rights are violated, you can directly approach the Supreme Court. But if your other constitutional rights are violated, you have to approach High Court first, and then only you can approach the Supreme Court by way of appeal from the judgment of High Court. But when it comes to fundamental rights, if your fundamental rights are violated, you don't have to wait for High Court. You can directly approach the Supreme Court. Okay? So Supreme Court, so fundamental, and that is what is guaranteed under right to constitutional remedies under Article 32. And under Article 32, Supreme Court of India can issue certain under Article 32 of the Indian Constitution empowers the Supreme Court of India to issue directions, orders and writs for enforcement of the fundamental rights of the people of India, including the citizens. What are the types of writs? I am going to discuss when I will discuss Article 32. The writs are habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, certiorari and quo warranto. And why this? What is the purpose of issuing these writs? To protect and enforce the fundamental rights of the people of India whenever they are violated. समझ में आया second characteristics? ठीक है. Now third characteristic of fundamental rights is that all the fundamental rights, ठीक है, all fundamental rights are available against, all fundamental rights are available against whom? Available against the state or against the arbitrary actions of state. arbitrary action. ठीक है, all the fundamental rights are all fundamental rights are available against the arbitrary actions of the state. ठीक है, but some fundamental rights are available against private individuals as well. Arbitrary actions against arbitrary actions. I repeat, all the fundamental rights are available against arbitrary actions of the state. Fundamental rights are against the state, all the fundamental rights, but some of the fundamental rights are available against arbitrary actions of private individuals. For example, Article 17. Article 17 is not only available against the arbitrary actions of the state, but also against private individuals, those who practice untouchability or enforce disability arising out of untouchability. So Article 17 is not only available against the arbitrary actions of the state, but also against private individuals. ठीक है, समझ में आया? Example, good. Next, some fundamental rights. Next feature, some fundamental rights are negative in nature. Some fundamental rights are negative in nature. ठीक है, right? ठीक है, some fundamental rights are negative in nature, meaning they basically put certain limitations on the powers of the state. So in that sense, some fundamental rights are negative in nature. They prevent the state from doing some things, that is, from violating your fundamental rights. So some fundamental rights are negative in nature. They act as limitations on power of the state. But some fundamental rights are positive in nature as well. See, most of the fundamental rights are negative in nature. Fundamental rights are essentially negative in nature. Why? Because they are against the state. They put certain limitations on the power of the state. But there are some fundamental rights which are positive in nature. It means that there are some fundamental rights which give certain privileges to the individuals as well. For example, Article 21A. Article 21A is positive in nature. That is fundamental right to free and compulsory education. Is it a positive? Yes. Right? Then Article 29, fundamental right under Article 29. Any section of citizens having their own distinct language, script or culture, they have right to conserve the same. Is it a positive right or a negative right? It is a positive fundamental right. Then Article 30, right of minorities to administer and establish educational institutions of their own. Right? It is also a positive, it has a positive implication. Okay? So, most of the fundamental rights are negative in nature. इधर लिखो. Most of fundamental rights are negative in nature, but there are some fundamental rights which are positive in nature. Examples: Article 21A, Article 29, fundamental rights under Article 21A, fundamental rights under Article 29, Article 30, so on and so forth. समझ में आया? Very good. ठीक है. Now, next important feature मुझे हंसी आ रही है, ठीक है, एनीवेज, a beauty of any teacher a beauty of any teacher to accept constructive criticisms but not illogical and useless criticisms. ठीक है, एज अ टीचर आपने कंस्ट्रक्टिव क्रिटिसिजम्स को लेना है. यू शुड नॉट कंसिडर एवरी क्रिटिसिज्म एज बैड, बट ऑल दिस कमेंट्स विच समवन इज मेकिंग, दिस आर ऑल यूजलेस क्रिटिसिजम्स. ठीक है, सो यू शुड टेक कंस्ट्रक्टिव क्रिटिसिज्म, यू शुड ओपन टू द क्रिटिसिजम्स, बट जो बकवास और फालतू की क्रिटिसिजम्स होते हैं उनको इग्नोर करो. सो आई एम इग्नोरिंग दैट. ठीक है, डोंट लाफ. ठीक है. चलो, नाउ द नेक्स्ट फीचर ऑफ फंडामेंटल राइट is that fundamental rights are not absolute. है ना, मन में आया कुछ भी बकवास बोल दिया, है ना. Fundamental rights are not absolute in nature. FR, fundamental rights are not absolute in nature. ठीक है, fundamental rights are not absolute in nature. They are what? They are qualified. They are qualified in nature. अब ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है समझना, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट समझना है. Fundamental rights are not absolute in nature, meaning fundamental rights are not unlimited. Fundamental rights are not unfettered. Can you say that I have freedom of speech and expression? It means that I can defame Dinesh sir by writing anything. Can you say that? No. Your fundamental rights are qualified in nature. Fundamental rights are not unlimited. अगर आप fundamental right unlimited कर दोगे, तो there will be chaos and disorder in the society. Right? My fundamental right of speech and expression puts duty on you to protect and respect my freedom of speech and expression. So make no mistake, क्योंकि हम लोग क्या समझते हैं कि हमको लगता है कि हम कुछ भी बोल सकते हैं, हम कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, और हम क्या कहते हैं कि हमको फंडामेंटल राइट है. नो, मेक नो मिस्टेक, फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर नॉट एब्सोल्यूट और अनलिमिटेड. फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर क्वालिफाइड इन नेचर, meaning state can impose certain reasonable restrictions. ठीक है, on enjoyment of fundamental rights. When we say that fundamental rights are not absolute in nature, they are qualified. It means that state can impose certain reasonable restrictions on enjoyment of fundamental rights of individuals. Okay? Now here the key term is reasonable. Fundamental rights are not unlimited rights. Fundamental rights are qualified rights. It means that state can impose reasonable restrictions on enjoyment of fundamental rights. Okay? Now, state can impose restrictions, but which restrictions are to be reasonable? Who will decide? That is to be decided by the courts, particularly Supreme Court and High Courts, higher judiciary. Okay? So now the condition, yes, fundamental rights are not absolute. State can impose certain reasonable restrictions, but the restrictions on fundamental rights imposed by the state, they should not be unreasonable. They should not be unreasonable. They should not be arbitrary. They should not be unjust. And they should not be unfair. Then they should not be disproportionate as well. Disproportionate. देखो बहुत बार ये क्वेश्चन आता है, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन, है ना, राइट, वर्सेस रेगुलेशन, सेंसरशिप. ठीक है, तो उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मेंस में आपको ये समझना जरूरी है कि फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर नॉट एब्सोल्यूट, दे आर क्वालिफाइड इन नेचर. इसीलिए अगर आप आर्टिकल 19 पढ़ोगे या बाकी आर्टिकल्स पढ़ोगे, ठीक है, आर्टिकल 19 हैज प्रोविजो दैट you have freedom of speech and expression, but subject to public order, morality, decency, contempt of court, so on and so forth. So you have freedom of speech and expression, but you cannot defame anyone. You cannot defame any teacher or any student for that matter. You cannot say anything कि भाई ये बकवास है, ये बेवकूफ है ना. You have freedom of speech and expression, but that is not unlimited right. That is subject to the restrictions by the state. But such restrictions by the state, they should be reasonable, just and fair. The restrictions imposed by the state, they cannot be unreasonable, arbitrary, unfair, unjust and disproportionate. State फंडामेंटल राइट्स के ऊपर रिस्ट्रिक्शन कर सकता है, बट ये रिस्ट्रिक्शन जो है, दिस सच रिस्ट्रिक्शन शुड बी रीजनेबल, फेयर एंड जस्ट. सच रिस्ट्रिक्शंस कैन नॉट बी unreasonable, arbitrary, unfair, unjust and disproportionate. And who will decide whether the restrictions, what restrictions imposed by the state are arbitrary and or unreasonable or reasonable? Who will decide? The court. The court, particularly high courts and supreme courts. समझ में आया? So always remember, your right to do something also gives you duty to do something. ठीक है? You have right, but at the same time you have duty to respect someone else's right. But unfortunately we focus only on rights and we ignore duties. But rights and duties are inseparable. They are two sides of the same coin. They are supplementary and complementary to each other. So to focus only on rights at the expense of duties is wrong. Or to focus only on duties at the expense of rights is also wrong. We should maintain a balance between rights and duties. Why? Because our rights, they are not absolute. They are not unlimited. They are qualified. Got it? Okay. Now the next important feature is that fundamental rights are not immutable, permanent, and sacrosanct. Fundamental rights are not immutable, meaning something they cannot be changed. Immutable, when you say that some fundamental rights are immutable, it means that they cannot be taken away. But fundamental rights are not immutable, they are not permanent, they are not sacrosanct, meaning they can be curtailed. They can be curtailed or abrogated. Use these technical terms. Abrogated by the parliament. Now this is a very important point. Did I discuss basic structure doctrine with you guys? Yes. At that time I told you that parliament has power to amend the constitution including fundamental rights. But such constitutional amendment passed by the parliament shall not destroy, shall not violate, shall not take away what Supreme Court called as basic structure of Indian Constitution. But Supreme Court in Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala case of 1973 did not say that entire fundamental rights are part of basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Did it say? No. So Supreme Court argued that Parliament has power to amend the fundamental rights. Yes, Parliament can limit or abridge the fundamental rights enshrined in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, subject to the condition that such restriction on fundamental rights cannot violate the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. तो सारे entire part 3 of the Indian Constitution is not part of basic structure. अगर ऐसा होता तो आप मुझे बताइए, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने केशवानंद भारती का केस कब, जजमेंट कब दिया? 1973 में. And when was right to property removed as a fundamental right? In 1978 through 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. क्यों? क्योंकि Supreme Court in Keswananda Bharati said that right to property is not a part of basic structure of the Indian Constitution. And that is why it can be taken away by the Parliament. And that is what Parliament did in 1978. It removed right to property as a fundamental right under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause F and Article 31 and made it as a constitutional right under Article 300A. Right? So, हमेशा याद रखना, in Keswananda Bharati case, Supreme Court ruled that Parliament has power to amend any part of the Constitution, including the fundamental rights, subject to the condition that such amendment to the Constitution by Parliament should not violate basic structure of the Indian Constitution. So, all the fundamental rights under Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, they are not part of basic structure. Only fundamental rights under Articles 14, 15, 21, only these fundamental rights are part of basic structure of the Indian Constitution. That's why they cannot be taken away. But they can be amended. Fundamental rights can be amended. Now let me give you another example. 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act, 2019. It amended Article 15. It amended Article 16. It amended Article 15 and included Clause 6. It amended Article 16 and included Clause 6. Right? 10% reservation to economically weaker sections of society. So can Parliament amend the fundamental rights? Absolutely. Can Parliament curtail the fundamental rights? Absolutely. So fundamental rights are not immutable. They are not permanent. They are not sacrosanct. They can be curtailed or abrogated by the Parliament. But how? How Parliament can curtail or abrogate the fundamental right? How? But by only Constitutional Amendment Act. Only through Constitutional Amendment Act, not through ordinary law. Passed under, to be passed under which article? 368, meaning special majority. So let me complete this particular feature of fundamental right. Fundamental rights are not immutable, they are not permanent, they are not sacred, they are not sacrosanct. You know why I am discussing this? I told you while discussing basic structure doctrine, I discussed about this one, Golaknath versus State of Punjab case 1967. And at that time I told you that Golaknath case represents one of the most or one of the fascinating defense of fundamental rights given by Supreme Court of India. In Golaknath case, Supreme Court gave a solid defense of fundamental rights. In that case, Supreme Court ruled that fundamental rights are immutable. They are transcendental. They are transcendental. They are immutable. They are transcendental. They are primordial rights. They are inalienable. They are sacrosanct. They cannot be taken away. But the judgment in Golaknath was overruled by Supreme Court itself in Keswananda Bharati versus State of Kerala 1973. Right? And before that, 24th Constitutional Amendment Act 1971. है कि नहीं? So that is why I believe basic structure doctrine is one of the most important topics of Indian polity, because there are so many important concepts involved in basic structure doctrine. If you understand basic structure doctrine, it will be very easy for you to understand the entire constitution. Okay? And that is why I discussed basic structure doctrine first, and then I am discussing fundamental rights. I am not following the sequence of Lakshmikant. Okay? A teacher has its own sequence. I am following logic. I am following concepts. I am going according to the concepts. Okay? Right? समझ में आया? So fundamental rights are not permanent. They are not sacrosanct. They are not immutable. It means Parliament can curtail or abrogate it. But how? Parliament can curtail or abrogate the fundamental rights only through passing Constitutional Amendment Act and not through ordinary legislative process. which requires only simple majority. Got it? ठीक है. Now another feature, ठीक है, fundamental rights can be suspended during promulgation of, or during operation लिखो, चलो, let me make it simple. During what? During operation or promulgation, during operation of national emergency. Under article, declared under article 352, except fundamental rights under article 20 and 21. Very important. See, I told you about three things. One is fundamental rights are not absolute, they are qualified. State can impose reasonable restrictions. Second, fundamental rights are not immutable, they are not permanent, they are not sacrosanct, they can be curtailed by Parliament through Constitutional Amendment Act. Similarly, fundamental rights, they can be suspended during the operation of national emergency proclaimed by President of India under Article 352, except fundamental rights under Article 20 and 21. It means that fundamental rights guaranteed under Article 20 and 21, they cannot be suspended even during national emergency. Now what is Article 20? Article 20 is about fundamental right against conviction of offenses. That is Article 20. Article 20 is about fundamental right to life and personal liberty. These two fundamental rights, they cannot be suspended even during the operation of national emergency. So even during national emergency, we as a citizens, we will continue to enjoy fundamental rights under Article 20 and 21. I will discuss Articles 20 and 21 in detail later on, but just remember this, okay? Fundamental rights can be suspended during national emergency except Article 2021. Further, fundamental rights under Article 19, six fundamental rights, okay? Six fundamental rights, sorry for my handwriting, six fundamental rights under Article 19, they can be suspended only when emergency can be suspended, only when national emergency, only when, I want you to write down all this, national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of, only when the national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of war or external aggression. External aggression. That is what? Emergency which is declared on the grounds of war and external aggression, it is called as external emergency. Okay? And not on the ground of armed rebellion. See, there are various concepts which are interrelated. इसलिए Indian polity को isolation में पढ़ना नहीं है. You have to interlink. Armed rebellion, it is called as internal emergency, right? है ना? Armed rebellion, internal problem, called as internal emergency. ठीक है, I repeat. Fundamental rights can be suspended during the proclamation of national emergency under Article 352, but fundamental rights under Article 20 and 21, they cannot be suspended even during national emergency. Further, 6 fundamental rights under Article 19. Which are 6 fundamental rights under Article 19? Freedom of speech and expression, freedom of assembly, association, residence, movement, and profession, trade, occupation, business, so on and so forth. These are the 6 fundamental rights under Article 19. Now, these 6 fundamental rights under Article 19 can be suspended only when national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of war and external aggression. The 6 fundamental rights under Article 19, they cannot be suspended when national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of armed rebellion. So when it means that when national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of armed rebellion, citizens continue to enjoy fundamental rights under Article 20, 21 as well as 6 fundamental rights under Article 19. Clear? Clear? Okay, fine. Now, next feature, okay? The scope of operation of fundamental rights is limited by Article 31A, 31B and 31C. Scope of operation of fundamental rights is limited by Articles 31A, Article 31B and Article 31C. Now again, remember our discussion on basic structure doctrine. We started off with Kameshwar Singh versus Province of Bihar case 1950. Then Government of India responded with first Constitutional Amendment Act in 1951. Now this first Constitutional Amendment Act 1951 along with other things added Article 31A, Article 31B and 9th schedule to the Indian Constitution. And it inserted 13 laws related to land reforms and Zamindari Abolition Acts in 9th schedule. So Article 31A and 31B were inserted through first Constitutional Amendment Act in 1951. Whereas the 31C, Article 31C was inserted through 25th Constitutional Amendment Act. 25th Constitutional Amendment Act 1971. Okay? 25th Constitutional Amendment Act 1971. Now let me discuss what is Article 31A, B and C quickly. Okay? What is the feature? The scope of operation of fundamental rights is limited by Articles 31A, 31B and 31C. What is Article 31A? Article 31 is saving of laws providing for acquisition of estates, etc. Okay, this is what is the title of Article 31A. संस्कार पांडे सर एनडीए के बारे में थोड़ा बता दो. एनडीए नहीं है, ये यूपीएससी है. और ये क्या है? कमलकांत मिश्रा, यहाँ बैठ के तुम कमेंट कर रहे हो. कौन है ये? अच्छा, यू आर नॉट. अच्छा, देयर इज समवन एल्स. ठीक है, चलो. Article 31A is what? Saving of laws providing for acquisition of estates, etc. What is Article 31A? देखो, Article 31A protects those laws which provides for acquisition of estates. Estates is like a property and certain other things from being challenged in the court on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. So if state acquires estate or suppose state takes over the management of properties, okay, then you cannot go to the court and challenge that. Why? Because operation of fundamental rights or the scope of operation of fundamental rights is limited by Article 31A. Article 31A protects the laws passed by the parliament for acquisition of estates, etc. from being challenged on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. Okay, right? Good. What is Article 31B? Article 31B. Article 31B is about validation of certain acts and regulations. ये बहुत important है. Validation of certain acts and regulations included in what? Ninth schedule. Again, see, Article 31B validates or protects the acts and regulations passed by the Parliament as well as state legislatures. Even in Article 31A, state legislature law is also included from being challenged on the grounds of fundamental rights. So Article 31B protects or validates certain acts and regulations included in ninth schedule from being challenged on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. So if any law passed by the Parliament or state legislature is included in the ninth schedule, then it cannot be challenged in the court on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. That is what first Constitutional Amendment Act did in 1951. What it did? It inserted 13 laws of state legislatures in ninth schedule. Which laws were they? These laws were about land reforms and abolition of zamindari system. Right? So Article 31B protects or saves certain acts and regulations included in the ninth schedule from being challenged on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. Right? Now, this particular issue is about judicial review of ninth schedule. ठीक है, ऐसा नहीं है कि Parliament by including any law, Parliament by including any law or regulation in ninth schedule can protect the fundamental rights can protect such laws from being challenged on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. This particular, the judicial review of ninth schedule of the Indian Constitution, it came in front of Supreme Court, before Supreme Court, in a very famous case known as I.R. Coelho versus State of Tamil Nadu. State of Tamil Nadu case. UPSC has asked this question in 2007. ठीक है, तो इसमें सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने क्या बोला? सुप्रीम कोर्ट said that there cannot be any blanket immunity from judicial review to the acts and regulations included in ninth schedule. Supreme Court in I.R. Coelho versus State of Tamil Nadu stated that judicial review is a part of basic structure of the Indian Constitution, and that is why the judicial review, power of judicial review cannot be taken away by inserting any law or regulation in ninth schedule of the Indian Constitution. So that is why Supreme Court in I.R. Coelho case in 2007 said that all those acts and regulations inserted in ninth schedule after 24th April 1973, they can be challenged on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights under Articles 14, Article 15, Article 19 and Article 21, and on the grounds of violation of basic structure. I am going to discuss this again, but judicial review of ninth schedule. I will take a separate lecture, but just to give you understanding. Okay? Article 31B saves, protects acts and regulations of parliaments and state legislatures which are inserted in ninth schedule from being challenged in the courts on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights. मीनिंग अगर पार्लियामेंट का कोई लॉ या स्टेट लेजिस्लेचर का लॉ नाइन्थ शेड्यूल में डाल दिया तो वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट या हाई कोर्ट में चैलेंज नहीं किया जा सकता है. लेकिन दिस पर्टिकुलर इशू, जुडिशियल रिव्यू ऑफ नाइन्थ शेड्यूल, केम इन फ्रंट ऑफ सुप्रीम कोर्ट इन आई.आर. कोएलो वर्सेस स्टेट ऑफ तमिलनाडु केस ऑफ 2007. सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने क्या बोला कि देयर कैन नॉट बी एनी ब्लैंकेट बैन, देयर कैन नॉट बी ब्लैंकेट बैन फ्रॉम जुडिशियल रिव्यू ऑफ laws included in ninth schedule, and it said that those acts and regulations inserted in ninth schedule on or after 24th April 1973, they are open to judicial review. They can be challenged in Supreme Court or High Court. Now, why 24th April 1973 was a cutoff date? Because it was on this date Supreme Court of India gave the doctrine of basic structure in Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala 1973. तो मतलब क्या, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने क्या बोला कि 24 अप्रैल 1973 के पहले, मतलब बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर डॉक्ट्रिन या केशवानंद भारती जजमेंट से पहले जो भी एक्ट्स और रेगुलेशंस 9th शेड्यूल में डाले गए हैं, दे कैन नॉट बी चैलेंज्ड इन द सुप्रीम कोर्ट और हाई कोर्ट. ठीक है, इवन इफ सच एक्ट्स एंड रेगुलेशंस दे वायलेट द फंडामेंटल राइट्स. बट इट सेड दैट 24 अप्रैल 1973 के बाद जो भी एक्ट्स और रेगुलेशंस 9th शेड्यूल में इंसर्ट किए गए हैं, they can be challenged in the Supreme Court or High Court on the two grounds. Number one, on the grounds of violation of not all fundamental rights, but on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights under Article 14, 15, 19 and 21, and second on the grounds of violation of basic structure. On these two grounds, the law or act or regulation inserted in 9th schedule can be challenged in the Supreme Court or High Court. Got it? But Article 31B does restricts operation of fundamental rights, particularly other fundamental rights apart from Article 14, 15, 19 and 21. समझ में आया? Article 31C. What is Article 31C? Article 31C saves laws to give effect to certain directive principles, to certain directive principles. Certain directive principles. Let us use D as capital. Certain directive principles of state policy. Article 31C was inserted through 25th Constitutional Amendment Act 1971. Remember this information. जब मैं directive principle of state policy और relationship between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy discuss करूँगा, फिर से Article 31C आएगा. Now Article 31C saves those laws which are passed to give effect to certain directive principles of state policy. These are directive principles of state policy provided under Article 39B and 39C. Okay? So Article 31C protects those laws passed by the Parliament, okay, which are passed to give effect to the directive principles of state policy provided under Article 39B and 39C from being challenged in the Supreme Court or High Court on the grounds of violation of fundamental rights guaranteed under Articles 14 and 19. Article 39B or C में directive principles of state policy है. These are about equitable distribution of income and wealth, equitable distribution of material wealth, so on and so forth. Now ये directive principle of state policy को implement करने के लिए अगर कोई law pass किया और वो लॉ फंडामेंटल राइट्स अंडर आर्टिकल 14 और आर्टिकल 19 को वायलेट करता है, तब भी दैट लॉ कैन नॉट बी चैलेंज्ड इन द सुप्रीम कोर्ट और हाई कोर्ट. ठीक है, दिस वी आर गोइंग टू डिस्कस अगेन, बट जस्ट रिमेंबर दिस थिंग, दैट स्कोप ऑफ ऑपरेशन ऑफ फंडामेंटल राइट्स, दे आर लिमिटेड बाय आर्टिकल्स 31A, 31B एंड 31C. समझ में आया दिस फीचर? ठीक है, आई डिस्कस्ड आर्टिकल 31A, 31B, 31C, बट आई एम गोइंग टू डिस्कस एवरी फंडामेंटल राइट one by one, article 12 to article 35. So even during that time we are going to discuss article 31A again, 31B again, 31C again. Even at that time I am going to discuss IR Coelho versus State of Tamil Nadu case of 2007. तो अभी अगर समझ में भी नहीं आया होगा तो it's okay. ठीक है, then the next feature, the application of the fundamental rights. ठीक है, ध्यान सुनना, I am not writing here. Application of fundamental rights to the persons or members of armed forces, paramilitary forces, police forces, intelligence forces or intelligence agencies, or any similar agencies can be limited or restricted by the Parliament. I repeat, another feature, do you want me to write down this? ठीक है. So another feature is that you want to go earlier, okay. ठीक है. So another feature is that the application of the fundamental rights to the members of armed forces, paramilitary forces, intelligence agencies, police forces and similar services can be restricted or limited by the parliament by law. This is provided under article 33 of the Indian Constitution. इसका मतलब ये है कि जो आर्म्ड फोर्सेस, पैरामिलिट्री फोर्सेस, पुलिस फोर्सेस, इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसीज या सिमिलर जो एजेंसीज है, इनके जो मेंबर है, इनके फंडामेंटल राइट्स पार्लियामेंट लिमिट कर सकता है बाय पासिंग लॉ. So Parliament under Article 33 has passed Army Act 1950, Navy Act 1950, Air Force Act 1950, Police Services Restrictions of Rights Act 1966. Thereby, under all these acts passed by the Parliament, the members of all these forces, armed forces, paramilitary forces, police forces, intelligence agencies, they do not enjoy similar fundamental rights the way we as a citizen enjoy. Their fundamental rights are restricted by the Parliament through these laws, Army Act 1950, Navy Act 1950, so on and so forth. For example, fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression of the members of armed forces, paramilitary forces, etc., it is restricted. Their right to form associations, right to be a member of trade union, it is also restricted. We as a citizen, if we are not member of armed forces or intelligence agencies or paramilitary forces, we have freedom of speech and expression. But ऐसा नहीं कि आर्मी के लोग जो मन चाहे वो बोल देंगे, नहीं. Because Parliament has passed Act under Article 33 which has limited the rights of those who are members of paramilitary forces, armed forces or intelligence agencies. They are prohibited from communicating with media. क्यों? पता चला जाके बोल रहे हाँ यहाँ पे हमारे न्यूक्लियर मिसाइल्स पड़े हुए हैं, मीडिया को जाके बोल रहे हैं. So it is restricted. Their fundamental rights is restricted. ठीक है, right? They cannot attend all the public meetings or demonstrations. They do not have members of armed forces and similar agencies. They do not have right to form associations. They cannot be a member of trade unions. Why? Because they are member of such services which have responsibility of defending the country. So Article 33 empowers the Parliament to restrict or limit the enjoyment of fundamental rights of members of armed forces, paramilitary forces, intelligence agencies, police forces and similar services. समझ में आया Article 33? ठीक है. Now the next, Article 34. The application of fundamental rights when martial law is in operation is also limited. Martial law means military rule. Okay, so when military rule is in operation, the fundamental rights can be restricted by the Parliament by law. Okay, so whenever military rule is martial law is in operation, what is martial law? Martial law means military rule. Military rule is imposed when there are abnormal circumstances wherein the civil administration is not capable of dealing with those abnormal circumstances. Then the civilian administration can be taken over by the military, and it can run the civil administration on the basis of their own rules and regulations which are outside the ordinary law. उनके खुद के अपने law और regulation के हिसाब से चलाएंगे वो. Civil administration will be taken over by the military during the operation of martial law, military rule. So the application of fundamental rights under Part 3 is limited when martial law is operation. I'm sorry, I said that when by Parliament by law. No, Parliament ने कोई law बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है. Article 34 itself says that the application of fundamental rights when martial law is in operation is limited or restricted. This is provided under Article 34. Okay? So these are the features of fundamental rights. Salient features of fundamental rights. Got it? चलो one by one मैं आपको revise करता हूँ. ठीक है? माइंड में है मेरे. दो फंडामेंटल राइट्स फीचर हम लोग क्लासिफिकेशन से ले सकते हैं. नंबर वन, सम ऑफ द फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर अवेलेबल to the citizens only, some fundamental rights are available to both citizens and foreigners. Second, some fundamental rights are self-executory fundamental rights and some fundamental rights are non-self-executory fundamental rights. Second feature. Third, fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. They are legally enforceable in a court of law. Fourth, Supreme Court acts as a protector and defender of fundamental rights. Okay? Huh? Right? In meaning, if fundamental rights are violated, then a person can directly approach the Supreme Court, not necessarily by way of appeal from the judgments of High Court. And Supreme Court have power to issue directions, orders and writs under Article 32 of the Indian Constitution. Okay, right? Then we discussed that all the fundamental rights, they are available against the arbitrary action. All the fundamental rights are available against the arbitrary actions of the state. But there are some fundamental rights which are available against the arbitrary actions of private individuals as well. I gave you example of Article 17. Okay? Article 19 also. Okay? Other citizens should also not violate your freedom of speech and expression. Private individuals. Okay? So Article 19 is available not only against the state, but also against private individuals. Okay? Then most of the fundamental rights are negative in nature. They act as a limitation on power of the government. But some fundamental rights are positive in nature as well. They give certain privileges to the citizens as well. For example, fundamental right under Article 21A, under Article 21(3), Article 29, under Article 30, right? Article 21A, Article 29, Article 30, etc. They are positive fundamental rights. Their intention is positive. Okay? Then I told you that fundamental rights are not absolute. They are qualified. Fundamental rights are not unlimited. State can impose certain reasonable restrictions on enjoyment of fundamental rights. So state can impose restrictions, but such restrictions should be fair, just and reasonable. The restrictions imposed by the state on enjoyment of fundamental rights cannot be arbitrary, unfair, unjust and disproportionate. And which restriction is arbitrary or unreasonable, unfair, unjust or disproportionate, it is to be decided by court from case to case basis. Okay, right? Then I told you that fundamental rights are not permanent, they are not immutable, they are not sacrosanct. Parliament can curtail or abridge the fundamental rights. But it can curtail fundamental rights only through Constitutional Amendment Act. And such Constitutional Amendment Act should not violate the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Okay, right? Then I told you about that fundamental rights can be suspended during the operation of national emergency proclaimed under Article 352. Except fundamental rights under Article 20 and 21. Fundamental rights under Article 20 and 21, they cannot be suspended even during national emergency. But other fundamental rights can be suspended during national emergency. Further, 6 fundamental rights under Article 19, they can be suspended only when the national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of war and external aggression. The 6 fundamental rights under Article 19, they cannot be suspended when national emergency is proclaimed on the grounds of armed rebellion. Then I told you about that, the scope of operation of fundamental rights is limited by Articles 31A, 31B and 31C. Then the next feature I told you about is that the application of fundamental rights to the members of armed forces, paramilitary forces, police forces, intelligence agencies and similar agencies is limited. Can be limited, not is, can be limited by the Parliament by law. This is provided under which article? Article 33. And then the next is the application of fundamental rights when martial law is in operation, it is restricted. When it is provided under Article, it is provided under Article 34. Now see, every feature is there in my mind. Why? Do you think that I mugged up all these features? No, I arrange these features systematically. Right? जब restrictions की बात आ रही तो सारे हमने restrictions वाले features एक साथ जोड़ दिए. और positive, negative, against state, against private individual, I combined them. So I systematically arranged and I found out a way to remember those features. I did not mugged up these features. So this is how you should study. लक्ष्मीकांत में ऊपर अरे यार ये तो 15 फीचर्स है कैसे याद करेंगे? Find out some logic. then it will be easy for you to remember all these features and try to interconnect concepts. Okay, fine. All right, so I hope you guys understood the features. Now you will be able to write down about the features of fundamental rights. In the next lecture, I'm going to discuss, I'm going to start with each and every fundamental rights. I'm going to start with Article 12. That is definition of state, and I'll discuss Article 13, 14, so on and so forth till Article 35. Got it? All right. Thank you. कोई question है आप लोगों को? आपको? Yes. Article 20, protection in case of conviction of offences. Okay, I will discuss Article 20 when I will discuss every fundamental rights in detail. Okay, at that time I will discuss it in detail. Okay, anything question? Any